of Aragon and Anne Boleyn, the first two wives of Henry VIII, so often portrayed as opposites. Catherine as the loyal, scorned wife, Anne as the bright, bewitching upstart. One representing the old world, the other the new.
But I want to explore what Catherine and Anne were really like. Their personalities and actions were at the heart of the central upheaval of Henry VIII's reign. They shaped this story and played as important a role as any of the men.
I'm going to look at the events that unfolded as Anne moved from being Catherine's lady-in-waiting to become the lady waiting to marry the king.
And although Catherine and Anne's rivalry changed history, I want to ask a surprising question. Did these women have more in common than separated them?
To look closely at Catherine and Anne, I've returned to Hever Castle in Kent, Anne's family home. Hever is staging a special exhibition focusing on the 1520s, the decade during which Anne went from being one of Queen Catherine's women to accepting King Henry's proposal of marriage. Hever has portraits believed to be of both women, a good starting point with castle historian and assistant curator Dr. Owen Emerson.
Owen, when Anne came back to the English court in 1522, what sort of court was she entering?
So the court is a very fluid thing, actually. It moves from space to space. So we have the palaces of Richmond, Greenwich, and Westminster, and the court will be continually on the move. And Anne enters into what is quite a sophisticated court as Catherine's maid of honour.
What did that mean for her days in practice?
On a day-to-day basis, they are essentially Catherine's companions. They are praying with her, reading to her, and also carrying messages and being a front-facing sort of representation of the Queen's household. This was an incredibly colourful and sumptuous environment that Anne was going into. You can just get a flavour of that from the clothes that Catherine is wearing here. I mean, she's in red velvet and cloth of gold, and she is completely bejewelled. This is a really glittering environment, and it must have been a really dazzling environment for the young Anne Boleyn to enter into.
Of course, there was much that separated Anne and Catherine. Queen Catherine was 16 years older, from another generation. She was a Spanish royal princess, an infanta of the Trastamara dynasty. Anne grew up at Hever Castle in Kent. She was the daughter of Thomas Boleyn, a successful diplomat and courtier, but not even an aristocrat. She had gained experience in the French court. Hever was a beautiful home for the Boleyns, a medieval castle converted into a comfortable manor house. But it was far from the opulent grandeur that Catherine knew. Among the palaces in which she spent her youth was the magnificent Alhambra in Granada. Inside, it is a place of intricate carvings, decorated walls, and honeycombed ceilings unlike anywhere else in the world. Catherine was the youngest daughter of two of Europe's most powerful, innovative, and ambitious monarchs, Isabel of Castile and Fernando of Aragon. Together they drove the Moors out of Granada and created a united Spain. To discuss Catherine's upbringing, I've come to Oxford to meet with Dr. Emma Cahill-Maron. Emma is writing a biography of Catherine.
What a treat to have a chance to talk about Catherine. Is it fair to say of Catherine of Aragon, and indeed all her sisters, the daughters of Isabel of Castile and Fernando of Aragon, that they were among the most cultured women of their time?
Yes, so that's a fair statement. Actually, they were the most cultivated women of their time. And this is because Isabel, when she became queen, she realized how much she lacked in her own education, and she took on learning things like Latin and other subjects. So she decided her daughters weren't going to have this problem because she wanted them to be ambassadresses of the lineage in other European courts. And she thought, I'll give them the best education that a woman can receive at this time, and that goes through learning Latin, because that was a tool to learn how to communicate in the diplomatic world. But it was definitely Isabella's decision to teach her daughters to be the best educated ladies and to represent the Trastámara house in the foreign alliances that they were going to establish.
To be well educated at this time meant engaging with a new European philosophy, humanism.
What sort of education were they receiving? If we think of it as a humanistic education, what does that mean?
It means that in the court of Isabel and Fernando, they were recovering the classics. And for the two youngest, she brought an Italian humanist to teach them all these new disciplines. Someone who was an astounding figure because he became the first Catholic bishop in America. So this is an outstanding figure teaching Catherine every day since the age of 7, alongside her sister Maria. They both studied together.
This was a court that was interested in humanism, the study of ancient texts with the moral goal of training one to make wise decisions. Foremost humanists included Erasmus of Rotterdam, an intellectual who looked back to the classical pre-Christian world for inspiration in interpreting the Bible. So Catherine had been educated to be a queen, and she had learnt by example. Her mother was a formidable monarch, and her parents ruled jointly as co-sovereigns.
What's so fascinating here is that Catherine comes from a society which has a different role for women than they have in England. She's come from a court in Spain that has a role particularly for queens as equal partners. Give us some sense of how different this was from what we know of English culture at the time.
They had independence from their husbands in a way that women in England didn't have. So I think this is what makes Catherine such a different queen in England. The fact that Isabella is the first ruling queen in Castile makes a whole difference for this generation of women. And it's not the same after. So it's a very important time for female education in Spain. So as soon as Henry and Catherine become king and queen of England, they have a project. We have to stop thinking that they were always against each other. They were married happily for many years. So whatever Henry did, Catherine was involved. And he valued her opinion for many, many years. And she had the connection. She had the international connections. When does Henry VIII become an international figure? When he's linked to Catherine of Aragon. All these connections just speak to the fact that Catherine had the know-how, Henry had the money. And people are just very impressed at the things they're building in such a short time. In those 10 years that they're constructing this project together, people are very impressed. So even Erasmus and Juan Luis Vives and Torrilla, all these people these people went where the good action was, and the good action at the time was in England.
Catherine didn't originally travel to England to marry Henry. Her husband was to be Henry's older brother.
The reason that Catherine came to England in the first place was to marry this boy, Prince Arthur, first son of Henry VII and Elizabeth of York. And in fact, this may actually be a betrothal portrait. Arthur is holding a flower which he is sort of proffering, which tended to be the iconography of betrothal portraits. Maybe this was sent to Catherine's parents so they knew what he looked like. And actually allying himself with Catherine's parents, two of the most powerful monarchs in Europe, was a very clever move on Henry VII's part. They had conquered Granada, and they also were kind of true blue blood. Their house, the Trastámara, had been established for decades. They gave a sort of heft and authority to the new Tudor dynasty. And that, of course, is why Prince Arthur wanted to marry Catherine.
But Arthur and Catherine were only married for 5 months. Arthur died, and it was another 7 years before Catherine married his brother, soon after he became King Henry VIII. The new king made no secret of his desire for a son and heir, but the couple had only one surviving child, a daughter named Mary. Also on display at Hever is a carving that shows the symbols of the dynastic union between Henry VIII of England and Catherine of Aragon and Castile.
You've got the Tudor roses on one side and the pomegranate on the other, Catherine's symbol, because it was the symbol of Granada. So this is where Catherine comes from and speaks to her. And I suppose it gives us a sense of what Catherine and Henry's relationship was like in the teens and 20s, early 20s. What do you think?
Very much so. I mean, here we have, a very potent symbol of their union. We don't just have their emblems together, but they are diminuted. They are literally spliced together. There's something very powerful about this representation of their union. And I think it's about stability and strength. As you say, this is the symbol that represents Catherine's strength and what she brought to the union.
It's by bringing the two together that you produce this royal power. You've got the relatively upstart Tudors marrying into the grand Trastamara family, and now we've got a royal dynasty to really reckon with.
Absolutely. This is the promise of what is to come, isn't it? It is that crowning of hope, really.
We so often rush ahead and think about the fact that it fell apart, but for so long it was such a strong union, and Henry took such strength from being with a woman like Catherine.
Very much so. I think it's really dangerous actually to look sort of backwards and not really focus on what were incredibly glorious years between Catherine and Henry.
But by the 1520s, Henry and Catherine's union was starting to falter. No son had survived, and there was little prospect of more children. During this time, Anne had returned from France to serve Queen Catherine, while her own marriage prospects were arranged.
The story goes that there were two possible marriages for Anne, one with James Butler, her cousin from Ireland, that was suggested to her, and one that she sought with Henry Percy, the heir to the earldom of Northumberland. The evidence is partial, but it seems that Cardinal Thomas Wolsey may have championed one and thwarted the other, and then sent Anne back here to Hever to stew.
But at some point, Anne returned to court. There's evidence that in 1526 she caught Henry VIII's eye.
We know it was that year because of letters that Henry sent to Anne while she was here at Hever.
A key letter was written in 1527, but referred to events the year before.
Henry's first letters to Anne are written in French, which is the language of romance. It's the kind of elevated language of courtly love. This is the crucial letter for dating the beginning of Henry's obsession with Anne Boleyn. He says to her that necessity constrains him to pursue your response, having been for more than 1 year struck du dart d'amour, by the dart or the arrow of love. So he's loved her for more than a year. Now Henry wants to know whether she will accept him or not, and he makes her an offer. He says to her, "Will you do the office of being my true loyal mistress and friend?" And he makes her a really appealing offer. He promises her that if she will be, he promises to vous prendrez pour ma seule maîtresse, that he will make her his only mistress. And what's interesting about this is that he's approaching her in the spirit of courtly love, and yet, unlike a courtly lover, he's demanding an answer, and he wants to know whether she will say yes or no.
Henry goes on to say that he begs Anne to give herself body and heart to him. It appears that Anne agreed to marry Henry in early 1527, provided he could annul his existing marriage to Catherine. In the meantime, the couple remained relatively chaste, but their affection was mutual. The next letter reveals she sent him a carefully considered gift.
This letter is very interesting because it tells us something about what Anne is doing in all this. Henry thanks Anne for the New Year's gift she has given him, the Lantraine, si belle, so beautiful that nothing could be like it. He thanks her for le beau diamant, the beautiful diamond, and the Nevers, the ship in which a damoiselle is tossed about. But principally, he says, for the beautiful, the belle interpretation, the interpretation and the humble submission that she has made from her kindness. Now, this is so interesting because we don't have Anne's letters to Henry, and so we often get a sense that she's the passive recipient and not active at all. But here we have, she is sending him a diamond. This is a two-way thing. We shouldn't imagine, because we don't have Anne's voice in all this, that she doesn't have a point of view, that she isn't herself exerting agency and telling Henry of her feelings too. And this, of course, is one of two famous letters that Henry signs off to Anne. H and R for Henricus Rex, Henry the King, with AB, her initials, in a love heart.
But what was Catherine doing while Henry and Anne were exchanging love letters? The evidence suggests that she was fighting hard to save her marriage.
In 1527, Catherine of Aragon was commissioning many things to start to defend her marriage. She had already commissioned a book on marriage to Erasmus of Rotterdam that predates 1527, so she already knew what was coming. But also, let's think about this. This is a year that we have miniature portraits of Henry and Catherine with inscriptions that say that Henry was in his 35th year of life. So we're right at that time. The miniature portrait of Catherine, it's a companion to a portrait of the king, and it says in Latin, uxor. So it means that she's defending and she's giving these miniature portraits to people in court.
There's a terrible irony to the pictures that Catherine commissions. And we can tell this from a letter that Henry sent to Anne. It's written in French, and he says, Je vous envoie, c'est-à-dire ma picture, mis en bracelet. There's a bit of English mixed in there. I'm sending to you, this is to say, my picture put in a bracelet. Now, a picture put in a bracelet, by definition, has to be small. It has to be a miniature. And it seems to me that the picture that Henry would have sent is one of the SEP that has been most recently commissioned. In fact, I think these are probably the only miniatures that have ever been painted of Henry by this point. He is sending Anne, his mistress, a picture which his wife has commissioned of him.
Giving his mistress a portrait commissioned by his wife is pretty outrageous behaviour, even by Henry's standards. It's too easy to see Catherine and Anne always in opposition at this time, competing for Henry and representing different sides of the religious division of the period. Catherine looking to Rome and Anne to new ideas. But they also had a lot in common. This is exemplified by two near-identical prayer books, one owned by Catherine, the other by Anne. They're the focus of an interesting research project by Hever Castle assistant curator Kate McCaffrey.
So, Kate, this is the book of hours that you know belonged to Anne Boleyn. How do we know it's Anne's?
Well, we know that this book of hours was once owned by Anne thanks to this beautiful inscription that we have at the bottom of this page here, which reads, "Remember me when you do pray, that hope doth lead from day to day." And you can see a careless binder has later cut her signature slightly at the bottom.
I guess they didn't know they were doing that when they chopped into it.
Exactly.
I mean, that is amazing, isn't it? This little line of poetry, her signature.
It's probably the closest you can feel to her when you're looking at her writing in her book.
So tell me about Books of Hours generally. What were they for?
So Books of Hours were Catholic prayer books. They were based on the scripture. They were predominantly written in Latin, although they did include vernacular prayers and psalms as well. And they were called Books of Hours because of the hours of the day that you were supposed to say the prayers at. So there were 8 specific canonical hours based on monks and monastery life and their religious day-to-day. And this is a Book of Hours, and Anne would have owned several of them and used them as well.
And it looks beautiful. It looks like a manuscript, but this is actually a printed book, isn't it?
This is a printing, yes. It was printed in Paris by a prolific printer, Germain Hardouin, and it's been hand decorated, which is why it looks more like a manuscript. So we see this trend a lot in printed culture in the early 16th century. It's the idea that you could have a cheaper printing, but you could elevate it to look like a manuscript, so to kind of emulate that manuscript culture through hand decoration. So you can see there is gold as well, which still has some nice pigment. So the initials have been added by hand, the borders and the images themselves as well.
Kate, how did this book survive?
Well, we know that this book survived through a network of Kentish women who were local to here at Hever Castle. And we know this because I found 4 further inscriptions within this book. And I can show you one of those now for what it looks like to the naked eye here at the bottom of the page. And this one is signed by a Mary West, who was an extended member of the Guildford family from Cranbrook in Kent.
And so that is sort of amazingly rubbed out now, but you so cleverly discovered that you can see it under ultraviolet light.
Yes, ultraviolet light is an absolutely useful tool for reading inscriptions like this that have been erased, so it was very helpful. I think it's a real story of loyalty, personal loyalty to Anne, why these women kept her book safe in the years after her destruction.
Is that the Guildford family related to Sir Henry Guildford?
Yes, indeed. Yes, it's the same family.
How interesting, because he was a great supporter of Catherine of Aragon.
He was. And interestingly, members of the Gage family also owned this book and have written in it, and they were also more supporters of Catherine of Aragon than of Anne Boleyn. But I think it could be a case of the women in the family putting aside political or religious affinity and instead having some kind of personal connection to Anne, because it really is the women in the family who kept this book rather than the men.
Yes, and that is a testament to Anne's character, that she was the sort of charismatic person who inspired that loyalty.
Definitely, and I think a testament as well to her friendships. We don't often look much at Anne's female friendships, but obviously she had female supporters like those who kept this book safe.
Yes. And what do you think a book like this tells us about Anne's faith and how she experienced religion?
I think it's a really personal, intimate insight into Anne's religious beliefs. We traditionally associate her today with religious reform, and this is a more traditionally Catholic text. But I think it's an important example of how Anne's interest in reform came from a genuine, rooted interest in religion in general. And to be engaged with reform, you had to be engaged with the traditional religion first to know what you wanted to change. But what is particularly interesting is that the English prayers in this book have clearly been used more than the Latin ones, which I think says perhaps speaks both to Anne's level of Latin, but also her interest in the vernacular and common tongues, which ties into her love of reform.
Can we have a look at those?
Yes.
So here are the English prayers.
Yes, so they start just here with O Glorious Jesu, and you can see down here that this page has been particularly well used. There's markings and creasings, which could be representative of people thumbing the page as they read. It was a very interactive process prayer. So it's hard to pinpoint exactly which are Anne's marks and which were other owners, apart from her signature, of course.
Now, the really interesting thing is that you don't just have one of these here in this exhibition, you have an almost identical book that was owned by Catherine.
We do indeed, it's a very special item.
Can we compare?
Yes, let's.
So this is the same book.
This is the exact same copy of the same printing by Germain Hardouin in Paris. And this is the same page that I've opened Anne's on to Catherine's.
First of all, let's just think for a second how extraordinary a thing it is
Yes.
that Anne and Catherine had the same book. Tell me about that. What do you make of it?
It's such an intriguing connection. When I made the connection between the two, I just thought it was such a rare glimpse of a moment of unity amidst a lot of personal turmoil at the time of these books' production. But I think it's an unusual one, really. We think of Catherine and Anne as being at odds so much, particularly in religion, and as being rivals in religion, with Catherine being more traditionally Catholic and Anne more reformist. So for them both to have owned the same prayer book and to have an actual moment of unity through prayer, I think is really almost slightly confusing at first. It's exciting.
So that's fascinating. So what we're looking at here is what looks like a nativity scene. Is that right?
Yes, this is the nativity scene.
But the illumination's really quite different, isn't it?
It's very different, and it's particularly interesting because the woodcut underneath would have been the same.
So Catherine's, well, I mean, for a start, it looks like we're outside. We've got a castle wall behind. And the man is much younger here, he's much older, and they're definitely inside, I guess, in a stable.
Yes.
And the fact this is framed completely differently as well is really startling.
I think we can't ignore that some of this may have just been the artistic preference of the artist, but specifics like you've mentioned, the gold page borders. Anne's also has extra red and blue corner decoration and these elliptical frames which are inscribed. That certainly to me seems like a personalised choice.
So we have to imagine then that when the books were commissioned, the patron said, okay, this is what I want this level of detail or this sort of package of illumination.
Yes, absolutely. This is where the personalisation comes in, and you can see that Anne's has been decorated to a more extravagant level.
Yes, it looks like the illumination of the letters is exactly the same. So maybe this is the standard package. And would you like the bronze or silver or gold edition?
Exactly, I think. And also through different artists down the production line. One likely would have done the initials, and then it would have been passed to artists to draw and colour in the woodcuts. So there's Anne's definitely, it was from a higher bonus package, I would say.
And it feels like it speaks to Anne's ambition, or perhaps more fairly her aspiration at this time.
I think it speaks to both, definitely. And I think through Anne's decoration here, she's really emulating a queenly status, which she is hoping and wanting to gain soon.
Can we talk about what this tells us about Catherine's faith? Because in this one you were looking at the English prayers and the fact that we can see use there. Is there anything like that in Catherine's book?
Yes, so in Catherine's book she actually had Latin prayers added at the beginning of the book on the fly leaves. They're manuscripts, they've been written by hand, not printed, and they have been very well used. The text itself has been rubbed away through a devotional process of prayer.
So it's a kind of physical prayer that you would trace your finger over what you were reading, perhaps?
Exactly, it wasn't just spoken, it was also felt.
And that was in the book from the very beginning?
Yes, it looks like they were added at production, so it's a real customisation.
And we know that those would have been there when Catherine owned it, if they were there from the very beginning?
Yes, exactly, so it's a really intriguing addition.
How do we know that this book was Catherine's, by the way?
So we know that this book was Catherine's because of an inscription at the back, not by Catherine, sadly, like Anne's is signed by her. It's by a later owner of the book, and it states that this book was once good Queen Catherine's. And it also states some later provenance that shows that this book was, in a similar arc to Anne's, kept safe by people close to Catherine.
So that's fascinating. This book has survived in exactly the way this one has, because people who had served each woman had decided to keep it close.
Absolutely, it's another story of personal loyalty.
And we should comment on what an extraordinary thing it is that we have these two books within centimetres of each other, because this book normally lives in New York in the Morgan Library, and you've brought it here for this exhibition precisely that we can see this moment of confluence between the two.
Absolutely, it's been a project for several years now to get this book over, Catherine's book from New York. And we really do think that it's likely the first time in 500 years, maybe even since their production, that these books have been in the same room together. So it's a beautiful reuniting in a way.
Do you think they would have ever been in the same room together when Catherine and Anne owned them?
So it's very hard to say, but we do know that these kinds of books, if they were presented to the Queen and members of her household, of which Anne was one at this point, that the women would have read together. They would have read their prayer books, read their books of hours together as an appropriate leisure activity. But it's hard to say if they sat down just the two of them and read it. I suspect not.
I suspect not, because of when these were produced.
Yes, 1527 is when it all happened, really. By 1527, Anne has accepted the king's proposal. She knows that she's going to one day be the wife of the king and become queen, but Catherine is still the queen and the wife of the king. So it's a really interesting point where we have both women's stories set, their paths are set in very diverging directions. But Anne's star at this point is very much on the rise, which perhaps is reflected in the decoration of her book, and Catherine's is sadly slightly on the wane.
But Catherine's going to go down fighting, because this is the year in which Henry's looking for an annulment.
Exactly. She is not going to go down without a fight, which is absolutely characteristic of her. You know, they were both very brilliant, stubborn women, which is maybe a little bit of a type that Henry had.
He went for the formidable.
He did. The formidable and intelligent ones, definitely, with Catherine and
Anne. Henry's hope was that he could annul his marriage to Catherine, as she'd been previously married to his brother Arthur, contrary, he said, to the teachings of the Bible. Catherine might have thought she had a reprieve when Anne was dispatched home because of a terrible disease that was sweeping the court. It was known as the sweating sickness.
In June 1528, one of Anne's ladies got ill with the sweating sickness, this devastating disease that killed horribly and killed quickly. Henry was paranoid about illness and he scarpered, and Anne was sent to Hever, came here to quarantine. She and her father were both very ill, as was her brother-in-law, William Carey, and William Carey died of the disease. Anne and her father recovered, but during this time, she and Henry were separated, and it was during these months that he sent her desperate letters, absence making the heart grow fonder. This was probably her bedroom, and so we have to imagine it was here that she recovered from that terrible sickness.
As Anne recovered, Henry's love letters continued to arrive at Hever, now rather bolder and written in English, saying things like, "What joy can be greater upon earth than to have the company of her who is dearest to me, knowing likewise that she does the same on her part, the thought of which gives me the greatest pleasure." Or, "Wishing myself in my sweetheart's arms, whose pretty duckies I trust shortly to kiss." Duckies is the Tudor slang for breasts. Henry and Anne had moved beyond courtly love into something more carnal. Anne would certainly have wanted to read those intimate letters away from any prying eyes. Owen thinks he's identified a possible location for this, just next to what was probably Anne's bedroom.
Oh my word. This is very pink.
It's quite something, isn't it? So we've got a very pink 1970s bathroom here that was installed for Lady Irene Astor.
And I mean, everything, even the scales and the loo are pink and have fleur-de-lis on them.
Nothing has been left untouched.
Yet, this space, though it looks obviously radically different to how it looked in the 16th century, you think this space was an important space for Anne Boleyn?
Absolutely. So we know that there is a window and a fireplace over here, and I believe this is the most likely location where Anne did her correspondence when she was here alone at Hever in the late 1520s.
And it's interesting because it looks out over the drawbridge. So you get this sense that Anne would have been able to see anyone arriving at the castle, people bringing messages, letters from the king.
That's exactly it. I mean, we know that George, her brother, is often acting as a message bearer. So I can imagine him riding in and Anne looking over to the front of the castle, seeing the horse riding in and retreating here to the most private part of the family apartments. and reading those amazing letters.
I mean, that's just given me a bit of a shiver, but which is strange because it looks so unhistorical as it currently stands, but that she would have read those by now quite fruity English letters that were being written by Henry. They'd moved into English, she said she's going to be his mistress, but they're separated. That happened here is quite something.
It really is, and I have a feeling that she may have kept those letters here too.
Gosh, rip it all out and see if there are any more behind the mirrors.
It's very tempting.
Wow.
It's been absolutely fascinating thinking about these two women as they really were.
Catherine and Anne.
Brilliant, well-educated people, indomitable in battle, faithful in prayer, making their mark in Tudor England and beyond.
Traditional narratives have for a long time pitted the two women against one another. I think it's easy to do that with the stereotypes of the wife and the mistress or the other woman. But we're really trying to widen that lens and look at what else united them, because they really did have a lot in common, a lot more than just a husband and a prayer book.
I think they were both highly intelligent women, and I think they both, to a degree, enjoyed exercising power. So I think they had a lot in common.
So, in other words, when we get to this love triangle of the 1520s, where we've so often written Catherine off as being this dowdy, boring woman, which she's not at all, and Anne being this scheming seductress, and actually what we've got instead is a love triangle between three brilliant people, or at least two brilliant people and Henry.
Exactly.
So interesting, isn't it? The fact that it is about wits, that it is about being clever and thinking their way through a problem, and that's why it becomes such a moment of butting heads, because Catherine will think her way out of the situation and think what to do, and Anne is coming up with clever solutions.
Yeah, I think that's completely accurate. I think you can see both Catherine and Anne strategizing, using their intelligence to get the best opportunity for themselves.
And Anne's opportunity seemed to have arrived. The wheels of international politics were turning, and there was hope that soon she and Henry would be married.
1528 was the last Christmas that Anne spent here at Hever. In September 1528, the Pope's Cardinal Lorenzo Campeggio had finally arrived to test the case for an annulment of Henry's marriage to Catherine. This was the time of great excitement for Anne. For Catherine, it was a moment to try and stage a comeback, to prove that her marriage to Henry was watertight. And so, as it went into 1529, the trial loomed on the horizon. The stage was set for the final battle, the trial that they believed would determine who was Henry's wife and who England's queen.